All right, good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this very special webinar on what has turned out to be a truly extraordinary time in our politics. And as it stands today, we have absolutely no idea what has gone on in the past 3 days. What we do know that the political horse trading that started way back in 2016, perhaps when we first saw the big dislodgement of the ANC from political power in some of the key metros in particular, has really escalated in this particular electoral cycle. Now, of course, the big question that must always underpin this conversation is whether this is indeed to the better of society or not, and that is something that we're going to have to wait and see. And as it turns out, it is indeed an appropriate moment for us to engage in this particular webinar, because if some of you remember, it was just 9 years ago, wasn't it, on this week, in fact, on the 21st of November, 2012, when Professor Pierre de Vos decided to write a letter to the then public protector, Thuli Madonsela, and simply said, I've heard something about a particular house in Kandla, please can you go and look into it? And that, of course, triggered a whole lot of events that have then essentially led us to the state of the nation as it is today. We are, of course, launching a book today, and this is a book that seeks to really try to give us a picture of what the past 10 to 11 years have been in South Africa. And I think a lot of us will read the book. We're going to see a lot of reflections and a lot of reminders of where we have been. The book is indeed called Permitted Plundering, which is what the politicians of our time essentially did. They essentially facilitated the plundering of resources by not doing a job. But before we get there, we are indeed going to take a step back to sort of talk about who my panelists are, and also perhaps the bigger question of what it is that we'd like you to deliberate on today. It is, of course, a conversation that needs to go viral on social media, like all conversations. So please do tweet about it, make people aware that we are indeed deliberating on the state of the nation. I'm going to introduce my first guest. Nancy Msibi is a project manager at the KAS, which is the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. I usually get my German right, but I think I've got it right this time. She does indeed hold a Master Philosophy degree in Political Management from the University of Stellenbosch and an MA from the University of Johannesburg. They are, of course, the patrons for this project that have supported this book project. Nancy, could you please just give us some insights before we get into the panel discussion?
Thanks, Kaya. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is one of 6 German political foundations that are currently operating in South Africa. The concept of a political foundation might be something unique to Germany. All major political parties represented in parliament have their own affiliated foundation that share their values but are operating independently and are not funded by the political parties. Their mandate mainly lies in training and civic education, as well as in providing funding for scholarships, research, and publications. The system of political foundations goes back to the time after the Second World War, when Germany took a decision to invest in its reconstruction, especially in terms of strengthening the young multi-party democracy. Apart from the work in Germany, CAS started its international cooperation more than 50 years ago. Currently, we have offices in more than 100 countries worldwide, where we work with local partners, focusing on promoting democracy, good governance, and strengthening the rule of law. We are pleased to have a partnership with OUTA on this important book, Permitted Plundering, How Parliament Failed South Africa, because indeed it's true, Parliament really failed us. We are all aware that corruption is prevalent in South Africa. It robs the citizens of basic services and so much more. The revelations at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture were shocking, to say the least. However, it only touched the tip of the iceberg. We know that there are still more people who should be investigated and who must wear orange overalls because they neglected the oath they took and abused their positions of power, robbing citizens, especially the poor people whom they claim to represent, of their livelihoods. Our leaders have no shame. They even stole during a pandemic, when we're at our most vulnerable. They saw a loophole and looted the state coffers. The digital vibe scandal and the horrible untimely death of Babita Deokaran comes to mind. She died in a hail of bullets because she dared stood up and didn't turn a blind eye in the midst of blatant corruption. She unfortunately paid with her life. There are many other whistleblowers who have lost their homes and livelihoods and are living in fear because they chose to do the right thing by reporting the corrupt officials. We salute them and wish more can be done to protect them. I'm reminded of Edmund Burke, who said, I quote, "All that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." This is our first cooperation with OUTA, and we are looking forward to further cooperation, supporting their work to expose and fight corruption. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our esteemed panelists and our moderator for making time to share their insights with us today. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that insight, Nancy. And of course, that support is definitely much appreciated, because I think we all understand in order for democracy to thrive, the question of resources can never be overlooked. I'm now going to move on to introducing my panelists, and I suspect so those of us who were able to remember what happened 10 years ago will remember in June 2011, there was this very strange turn of events where someone who should have been comfortable in a corporate boardroom running Avis then suddenly decided to write an article. And of course, in June 2011, when Wayne wrote this article about this looming crisis around e-tolls, suddenly a lot more people stood up and paid attention. Wayne Duvenake is indeed an entrepreneur, a writer, and a change agent who, from that moment in June 2011, has been thrust into the world of activism, in the world that he probably didn't think his career was going to turn out. And of course, these days, he is indeed the engine room behind OUTA, which was originally opposition to Urban Tolling Alliance, in case you've forgotten. And it is these days, it has evolved into an organization that seeks to undo tax abuse. It's the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, who of course have been central in putting this project together. Good afternoon, Wayne.
Good afternoon, Kaya. Nice to be with you in the panel today. You've said it all.
Thank you. One of the interesting phenomena of recent South African history is how the accidents that journalists have stumbled upon have actually got us to where we are today. And I remember in particular the story of the late Mandy Rousseau traveling randomly in a place called Gandla and then discovering that there was an interesting development there. The Waterkloof scandal, again, a journalist traveling between two cities says that looks like nice jet, that looks like a nice private jet on an Air Force base. Wait, hold on, what's going on there? So journalists have been central to the story of us finding out where we are. And of course, we have a journalist on the panel. Ilse Sazwadom is an award-winning journalist, and she's written 7 non-fiction books. Although I suspect you'll say that this is the one book which probably gravitates towards the fictional aspects, because a lot of these things, if you told people about it, they'd be like, no, it can't have happened. So thank you very much, Ilse, and welcome to you.
Thank you, Kaya.
Yeah. Speaking of Air Force bases, isn't it appropriate that we're also joined by someone who would have understood exactly what it means for a commercial plane to land at that Waterkloof Air Force Base? And this is Rudy Heineken, who was a member of the SA Air Force way back in 1987, a qualified avionic technician, and these days as a member of OUTA is a person who observes some of these trends and some of these fault lines in our society and provides insights on that. So thank you and welcome to you, Rudy.
Good afternoon, Kaya, and thank you very much.
So Wayne, I'd like to start with you, because obviously for us to end up with this book called Permitted Plundering, How Parliament Failed South Africa, there is a very obvious question of, well, what exactly is it that Parliament owes to South Africans? What is it that the 400 members of the National Assembly that emerge every 5 years as the elected representatives, what is it that they owe South Africa for us to end up with this concept that they failed us?
Well, it is all around accountability. Organizations like OUTA and many NGOs shouldn't exist. We shouldn't have to exist. We should be able to rely on the members of parliament that are sitting and managing the process of government in this country, overseeing the conduct of the cabinet, as well as various departments, SOEs, and holding them to account. And if that is missing in action, then everything goes wrong, as we've seen. And it all depends on to what extent it can go wrong, or to what extent they can have their oversight. But there are lots of laws, there are ethics committees, there are many processes which they need to use and use constructively in order to hold the various ministers and people in power to account. And if they don't, as we've seen, and they look away as they have done, then we have the serious collapse of a state, and states go under as a result of it. We shouldn't have got to where we are if we had have had a parliament that had its eyes open and its ears open and doing their job.
Really, the genesis of this compact and this duty that parliamentarians owe to us as citizens is not just something that emerges from some constitutional compact. In fact, when every single one of them is being sworn in, that is essentially what they're signing up for, to say, yes, we will do this job, we'll do our task at the mercy of the South African society. So when they don't do it, it should be able to hold them to account to say, wait, hold on, your inability to do that is not in line with what you signed up for when you raised your right hand in front of either the Chief Justice or a Deputy Judge President of a parliamentary legislature.
Yeah, who's that to me? Yeah, Kaya?
Rudy.
To Rudy. Rudy?
Yes, Kaya, I fully agree with you. You know, we only get the opportunity to make a cross every 5 years. And when you make that cross, you believe that the representative that you put in Parliament will, live up to the duties that they must perform, and that they will look at the best interest for, for everybody in the country. So it is very important that, first of all, that we make that cross every 5 years and make a decision, and then secondly, that they uphold the oath that they take every year.
With that understanding, Rudy, I mean, again, how does it come to be that so many of our parliamentarians have somehow either misunderstood that or simply failed to live up to that particular expectation? Is it an accident of history, or are we actually paying the sins for the electoral system that puts them there in the first place?
Well, I think if you look at the what happened and what transpired in the Zondo Commission, where we clearly heard from the leader of the governing party as well as other parliamentarians that they toe the party line, and that is not what we vote for. We vote for the individual, or we vote for the party, but we expect the individual to live up to the expectations and to protect the citizens of this country and to perform to the best of their abilities.
And I think obviously that understanding is something that we somehow need to make sure that everybody understands, not only those in Parliament, but for those that actually cast their vote, and that results in people being in Parliament in the first place. So that's a key issue. Also, the issue of documenting our history and archiving life as we live through it is a remarkably important one. And I imagine that books in particular are able to say, sort of enable all of us to be able to have a reference point that allows us to reflect and say, wait, hold on, this actually happened. Talk us through why this book was conceptualized.
Well, I was asked to write this book after CAS and OUTA's communication teams got together, and they said, please document our affidavit to the Zondo Commission. OUTA submitted something to Zondo. In fact, OUTA submitted several documents to the Zondo Commission, but one was specifically on parliamentary failure. And like Rudy and Wayne pointed out, that thing where parliamentarians had the chance to do something but chose to do nothing. And that was the starting point of the book. And I had very good company that sort of wrote the first ideas for the book in the person of Jonathan Erasmus, and he took the line of documenting history, and I just embroidered on that, added onto it, and in the end a fascinating picture unfolded, because that's part of writing a book. A book has its own direction, and this book literally just sort of decided for itself, this is things to include. And what I hope we've done here is to put part of the puzzle of South Africa and of state capture out there so that the public can read it and can understand it, because this is not the ultimate book on state capture. I think we can write libraries full of books on what happened and how different people felt. I hope this book starts a very important conversation.
Yeah, it's a very important spark. And Wayne, I want to come back to you on this one, because at the heart of it, when we deliberate on these cases, perhaps it was this inability to understand the essence of public accountability that essentially opened up the winds of what became state capture. Now, when it talks of public accountability, even as far back as 2011, that's even beyond the question of state capture itself. This idea that when government acts, it should act in the best interest of society, that was essentially the tension point behind e-tolls anyway, where people are saying, wait, hold on, you may have made a call, you may have made a decision, but it's not actually in the best interest of the society that you seek to serve. So that should be the checkpoint that says, wait, hold on, we thought we were doing it for these reasons. It turns out these reasons are not borne out by facts. So that for me is where accountability ought to start. But from the volumes of records of Wusimona and Nazir Ali trying to obfuscate and dribble us through all of this, accountability doesn't seem to have been entrenched in government at any point in time.
Yeah, right from the minister who was supposed to question what was happening with this decision, Minister Jeff Radebe at the time, none of that took place, and we saw that in the papers, right down to the powers that be within SANRAL, who had hatched a very elaborate plan, and they forgot to engage meaningfully with society. And so when the time came to launch, what actually unfolded was what I often call the possibility of government. When government isn't able to or not possible to manage its own laws, it becomes defunct. It becomes the laughing stock of the people. So you don't want to introduce laws and processes that cannot be governed. It's as simple as that. So they thought they would introduce this elaborate drive now, pay later scheme without telling the people until it was there to be launched. In other words, it was one of those, well, it's too late to stop it now situations. We tried to stop it in court. It was very technical. We managed to get the interdict, but we were overturned eventually because the money had been paid and the tarmac had been laid. And the beauty then was to say, well, does society stop here now? Or do we challenge the state in what the Supreme Court gave us as a backhand compliment, opened the door for a collateral challenge? So is society going to be brave enough to launch a civil disobedience campaign? And OUTA was asked, well, will you defend us in court if we are summoned or blacklisted or can't get our licenses? And we said, sure, we will, on one condition, that we can afford to do so. We took a lot of research on how we would go about doing this. And we set out on what we thought was almost impossible, but apartheid was overthrown through civil disobedience against the past laws. And these were impossibilities that the public face. Again, unenforceable and grossly irrational laws need to be treated in the way by the public that they should. So that's where it started. And it was an incredible journey. We are still going through that process now, but the public have won. The public have spoken, and that's what I like when we talk about challenging that which is wrong in government in every which way is possible, not only through the law, but through civil disobedience when it is called for.
Very important considerations there. Rudy, obviously, as someone who's been observing the parliamentary process over an extended period of time and also trying to connect some of the dots, you probably can give us a very, very concrete and a very cogent explanation of how this phenomenon that probably started long before most of us became aware of it, essentially enraptured Parliament and became this paralyzing mechanism that people refer to as state capture.
Yes, I think that officially, state capture was, the kickoff happened in Parliament on 11 February 2010 when former President Zuma announced the 846 billion rand capital expenditure and infrastructure program, where the bulk of the money was allocated to Transnet and to Eskom for energy and the road program. And from there on, the whole thing just evolved, and there was new cabinet ministers appointed. Coming to mind, Malusi Gigaba appointed on the 1st November 2010, and right after that, he announced he appointed a new board of Transnet, which included someone like Iqbal Sharma, that we know that's been charged now with corruption, who was involved with the Guptas long before this. So. This is, for me, that is where state capture started off. But it went back a few years before that, when Ajay Gupta was introduced to the Brand SA panel by former Minister Esop Pahat. It's an initiative that former President Thabo Mbeki started with. And there he could rub shoulders with, politicians and businessmen of South Africa. And it just, evolved. After the announcement by President Zuma, You know, the media, the new age, it took off in December 2010 as well. So the media was in place for the African National Congress at that stage. New ministers were appointed, and then very interestingly, you know, the compact, the shareholders compact and the authorities of the board were increased. So what happened there is that in 2012, for example, the board of Transnet had authority to decide over an amount of 2.5 million, and in 3 years' time that was doubled up. So they could make a decision for amounts up to 5.2 million rand. So that is, you know, the 2010 and the 2011, 2012, that was the early years for me as on state capture. And from there on, you know, it was the locomotives. And when that was ballooning, they went over to Eskom. But do not forget all the other small SOEs and other government departments and the provinces, especially the Free State, that were pulled into this Gupta web, and where a lot and millions of rands were spent on it.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important date, and they should say that on the 11th of February 2010, that is essentially when the blank check was signed, where clearly this big infrastructure build was going to take place. And of course, for as long as accountability mechanisms exist, then perhaps there is no issue. Quite ironically, you say 11 February 2010, I'll say to you, it was exactly 2 years earlier, on the 11th of February 2008, when Charles Ngakula stands up in Parliament and says, we are disbanding the Scorpions. Talk us through that, Rudy.
True, because from that time, you know, law enforcement were hollowed out. The prosecuting authority went down in a dip, and parliamentarians just went along with the flow of the governing party at that time, and it didn't become better at any stage after that. And I think what happened further on is that, you know, we can talk about a lot of oversight committees and parliamentary committees that had the opportunity at some stage to come in and to do their oversight properly and to make recommendations. But we have seen a lot of investigating, the committees investigating some of the SOEs, for example, but it all came to nothing. And that is the sad part of the oversight role that Parliament played at that stage.
Yeah, a very tragic role. Ilse, you know, when you're trying to put together this book, there was a lot of episodes, there's a whole lot of chapters, and as I paged through them, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, there was also that. So there's clearly a lot of information out there. And I suppose the question of how you put this tapestry together is not an easy one, in order to try and figure out that these are stories that may not be part of maybe even the Zondo Commission with its limited scope, but play such a fundamental part in the key question of how South Africa got to where it is, and how the accountability compact was completely broken, which enabled that plundering to happen and for Parliament to sit idly by. How do you sort of then work around which are the key stories to sort of embed into a story of this nature? Because if we allowed more time, there'd be many more pages, wouldn't there?
Yes, and if you could publish a book of 1,000 pages and imagine that anybody would buy it, I could have gone that route, but you sort of have to focus on the key issues. But hopefully this will also force people to go and read up a bit and just jog their memories. Because it's very easy to disappear down a rabbit hole once you start researching. You will know yourself. If you research a topic, there are so many sideshows and side paths that you can take. But like I said earlier, the book sort of directed its own direction. And with Rudy's help, Rudy can recite stuff on stat capture in his sleep. I'm sure if you wake him up tomorrow morning at 3, he will rattle off the figures. It was quite easy to also decide where to put the main focus. We haven't even touched on all the SOEs and all the provincial government stuff. But I had to try and focus on work that OUTA did, areas where we focused. And we did a lot of work, for instance, on the Free State corruption, on Eskom, on the SABC. In the early days, OUTA was one of the first organizations to publicly speak up about the tax abuse happening at the SABC. So that was part of the stuff that focused me was what did OUTA do and what is of very clear national importance. But like I said, we can probably write another permitted plundering with all the information that's out there.
Speaking of national importance, Wayne, I'm hoping you can see a picture that I've put on the screen, because this is what the problem is. And for those of you that are watching, if you remember what has happened here is that Mendy Rousseau, where the late journalist, has stumbled upon a construction in Gandla. Peter Forces lodged a complaint with the public protector in November 2012. Lindiwe Mazibuko has done the same to follow up and say, wait, hold on, let us talk about this house. And of course, the issue here, Ilse, is that Parliament was not unaware of its role to respond to some of these public interest concerns and some of the public interest questions that have been asked. And so by the time we end up with this Gandla ad hoc committee, this is somebody having reminded Parliament that, hold on, you've got a role to play. Only for us to discover that when Parliament does play its role, guess what happened? Talk us through this episode.
Well, you actually reminded me of this picture when we spoke on Monday, and it is two ministers literally painting their nails while the Nkandla debate is underway in Parliament. And after we spoke about it, I also thought of Malusi Gigaba playing Candy Crush during one of the most important budget or SONA speeches that we ever had in South Africa. And I think this is part of the big problem, is that the parliamentarians don't realize that they don't just sit there to paint their nails or to earn big fat salaries. They sit there with a duty to the people that elected them. And this is, like you said earlier, would probably go down as bad fiction if you write a book like this. But this happened on the day of the Nkandla debate. One is Minister, I've forgotten the name, she was Minister of Tourism on the right. Yes, and I mean, if this is the kind of interest you show in national matters, what on earth are you doing in Parliament? Vacate your seat and give it to somebody who wants to be there and serve the people.
Yeah. Wayne, coming back to you now, I mean, perhaps if we had to find one picture to crystallize the essence of what the book is about, there are very few pictures that are as instructive and as very clear as this one, because this, for me, tells the story of where South Africa was headed even that far back, and it only escalated from then on, did it not?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think the issue here is you should be getting the parliament or the government that you elect, but what happens in our electoral system is that this party patronage process takes place. And I saw one of the comments, well, you know, if you're going to have people that are involved in the plundering that are sitting in MP positions, well, of course they're going to look away. And that's exactly what happens. So we've got an electoral process where we vote for a party, and the party will decide, not you or I, as to who is going to sit in Parliament, depending on what percentage they get and how many seats they get. And the people that they select, you've got no say in. Whereas the electoral reform that we're calling for, and we've gone to court on with the New Nation Movement and others, is to ensure, and this electoral reform discussion started way back with Van Zyl Slabbert and others, to say, look, there's something fundamentally wrong when you have this catered deployment and this party patronage process that well, you've got a powerful president who can remove you from these lists, remove you from Parliament, whatever they want to do. So you need to toe the party line. And that's why we have this type of conduct. And that's why we have people looking away when the exact issues, the evidence that is put before them of clear plundering, which is taking place in Nkandla and many other instances after that, are put in front of them. And they just can do nothing. They are deers in the headlights. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their ability to contract and do business with government. And so they fail you and I completely. That's why we sit here with this mess.
Rudy, the design of our constitution, the design of our governance framework simply says that accountability is important. In other words, for every term of parliament, for every administration, of the 400 MPs, somebody is going to be part of some committee, some oversight structure in one or another. So the idea of parliamentary oversight is not foreign. The question that I put to you is, well, what difference does it make if we have all these oversight committees and then we still end up with pictures like this one on screen?
Yes, I think you make a very important point. People in Parliament, parliamentarians are allocated to different committees. Something that struck me before was when certain issues were brought before a certain committee, you would expect committee members to prepare for that specific meeting. And one instance is that, when the chairman of the NEL at the time, Mr. Daniel Mancha, appeared before the committee in Parliament regarding the Denel Asia saga and regarding their decision, and they asked him about it. He walked circles around them because they did not prepare. They could not understand the difference between a VR laser and a VR laser Asia. The one is an African company, the other one Hong Kong registered company. And some of them even mentioned VR laser India, and there's no such company. So it is all about not only just sitting in the committee, but prepare for a specific meeting so that you can fulfill your role in oversight, make recommendations, and then stick to the recommendations and see that it is put through.
That's quite key. I think we lost you there for a moment, Rudy. But Ilse, coming back to you, I mean, obviously, now that we've seen that there is indeed this glaring gap between what parliamentarians are supposed to do and what it is that they actually do we then see an archive of this nature like this book enabling us as citizens to be able to reflect and say, wait, hold on, if it turns out that we facilitated a system or participated in a system that still has this particular disconnects, then we've got a basis for asking perhaps about whether this is the right electoral system we have as citizens. Is this a type of archive that gives us more as citizens to be able to reflect on and say, apparently it's not good enough to simply say that there's oversight and accountability. The actual evidence in front of us says that it's not working in its current form.
I do think so. And I think it's time for South Africans to wake up and realize that we are actually holding the power. We are electing these officials. And I think the recent local elections pretty much showed the ANC that there's a big disconnect between what they think they are standing for and what citizens see them standing for or not standing for. And I think this should serve as a turning point in our internal politics. I studied political science at the University of Stellenbosch under Professor Henny Kotze and Jannie Gagiano and them way back when. And the one thing I still remember about my course is the term participation implosion. And it happened with the national government, and it happened with the ANC, and it will continue to happen to them until they learn the lesson. And that is that you cannot exclude the people from politics, because the minute you do that, you stand a good chance of the political system imploding on itself. And one way that happens is with a stay away vote, like we've seen now, and that we've seen in the Eastern Cape before. And it will continue to just dwindle. Votes will just dwindle for whoever is not doing their jobs. And I hope that this book also puts the power back in the hands of the people reading it and making them realize that we are actually, voting is one part of your civic duty. Holding politicians from your ward councillor up to the president accountable is the most important part of your civic duty. And you must participate wherever you can, be it in the local elections, be it in the local budget, lobby, be active citizens, and participate in the system. Because if we don't do that, we will lose the system and the democratic system.
A consideration then, Wayne, even though they ought to have known better, they ought to have understood how accountability works, even though when an opportunity was provided to them to exercise it properly, they squandered it. there was still another opportunity because other political parties, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, and other civil society organizations looked at this picture and they said, no, this cannot be it. And that, of course, is when the judiciary itself was then brought into the picture, resulting in that landmark Nkandla judgment. What role did that play in actually getting us to sort of look at things differently? Did it narrow the accountability gap, or was it simply regarded by parliamentarians as just one episode that they could forget about and then revert back to their own ways?
It was extremely meaningful. It showed society that they can do something. They can stand up and win against government. They can get the courts. And the courts have to be very careful that they don't usurp the executive powers of government, and they keep repeating that and they make that clear. But there does come a time when the courts tell Parliament to start acting, to start doing their jobs properly. They're reminding them of the laws that they have overlooked or not applied. So that was an extremely good judgment. And there have been others that have flowed since then. And I guess that's where we took our cue as well, when we said, you know, how is it possible that someone like Dudu Myeni can crash an airline in the way she did and not hold her to account? And so we took a civil claim against her as a delinquent director. But there's the picture that just goes to show how much of a mockery and how they believe, Parliament believes, and the stooges that get behind the president to try and justify this are trying to convince us as citizens that actually this is very important. We don't want the president's house to burn down. So this swimming pool is actually not a swimming pool, it's a fire pool. And going to install some pumps on the outside. I mean, if it was really a fire pool, all those pumps and everything would have been built into the whole system. So it's an absolute farce, and it makes a mockery of the system. It's actually quite embarrassing when the world looks at us and says, is this really happening in your country? Is this how you run your country? Is this how you justify spend on a president's house? It's a sham. It's the biggest sham. And that's what Parliament became, a sham.
A very scary state of affairs. Rudy, when we do talk about Parliament having become a sham, there's obviously going to be the questions that emerge about how to turn it around, how to do it differently. And my suspicion, unfortunately, is that, as you may have heard at the State Capture Commission this year in particular, when one of the current ANC deputy ministers, in fact, when the question was put to her to say, well, do you owe your loyalty primarily to the country, to the constitution, or to the political party that gets you there? And to her credit, I think she was fairly honest about it, to say, well, I don't elevate myself into Parliament, I go there on a party ticket. So for as long as the party says this is the line I must toe, this is what I might do. Does that understanding, or does that approach to running the affairs of the state simply mean that we're never going to get this right?
It's very important that we, talk about this, and I think Wayne will also elaborate more on the electoral reform question. But like Wayne said before as well, the parliamentarians are chosen by their political party, and they are not elected by the electorate, by the ordinary citizen in South Africa and the ordinary voter. But to come back to, towing the party line, and it is exactly because of that we are where we are today, because I think that there were a lot of parliamentarians that wanted to speak, with their conscience and say, listen, this thing cannot be right. This cannot go on like this. But they had to toe the party line. And we've heard that in, at the Zondo Commission. And it is a sad state of affairs. And what I think what we as public must do is to, stay in their faces and be present and participate. Public participation is so important. Every now and then you will hear that there's a public meeting somewhere, and you just see that the people don't rock up and they do not participate. And that's something that we as electorates and we as citizens must change, so that we can be there and that we can participate and that we can hold their feet to the fire. And the other thing that's very important is that for the ordinary citizen, Parliament is not a very transparent place. We don't see exactly what's happening there. We've got party TV, etc., but what's happening behind the scenes? The other thing is that we never see when somebody says in Parliament, we will answer you in writing. We cannot answer the question right now. We as the public, you know, we've got a parliamentary office, and our colleagues down there in Cape Town, they battle to get these answers out of the parliamentarians. And that is, you know, another crucial thing that must change in Parliament, and that's transparency, so that we can all know and all be on the same page when decisions are made.
Yeah, a very key consideration then. Ilse, I mean, as a writer and a researcher, when you do put together an archive of this nature together, there's probably that one story that you said, even though I'm writing it from my capacity as a researcher, when this happened, I myself had my jaw dropping. Is there a particular chapter in the book that you simply say that this is the one that perhaps crystallizes the essence of how Parliament failed us, how they permitted plunderers to plunder us into obscurity?
I do think we should all read the chapter on the Waterkloof landing again, because we saw bits and pieces of it playing out in the media, and we weren't taking that much notice because all was well in the country. I don't think people even realized that there was this process of state capturing basically kicking into motion. And if I look, just coming back to your comments about towing the party line, during the parliamentary debate on Waterkloof, Minister Naledi Pandor stood up and said to the DA, who were very much debating the point of the Waterkloof landing and the legalities of that, that they should stop acting as a party and towing the party line. People should really be allowed to think for themselves. And I just thought that was so funny. If you look back at everything that took place in the last 9 years, if you look at the Zondo Commission and what was said there, that I was elected by the ANC, I will only serve the ANC. Basically the cheek of it, that the ANC was always just fighting for themselves. This morning, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma tweeted that they take note of the dismal outcome of the elections. It is time to start rebuilding the movement. So no, let's rebuild the country. Let's rebuild the movement. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in South Africa that I've seen every time that I started a new chapter, that it was always about individuals and about political parties and never about the country and its citizens. So I would say Waterkloof, the Waterkloof chapter is my favorite, because you can clearly see how the chess pieces are put on the board, ready for the game to start.
Yeah, very important one. Wayne, I'd like to also hear from you, which chapter probably resonated with you the most, because I imagine that having been thrust into the forefront of civil activism based on that article in particular that you wrote in June 2011, you've actually over time got to see more of what happens beyond the coalface of corporate boardrooms, what happens when society has to interact with politicians, often with some very dodgy outcomes.
Yes, Kaya. Look, I just like the way that Ilse and Rudy have weaved this book and put it together, telling the story in a way that, you know, it's not just joining dots. This is coloring in the picture so that people can sit back and say, now I get why the importance, what the importance of Parliament is. Every one of these chapters, I mean, SABC and the way that Claudia Motsoeneng was just allowed to run riot over a national broadcaster was one that again, living through it and reading the media statements at the time and being outside SABC and understanding what's going on, but reading it again, those aha moments that come to play, and how a kindergarten teacher like Dudu Mnyeni is given the reins of and allowed to interfere with the intricate, very complex business of running an airline. And no wonder it has crashed, and everybody continued to look away. So, you know, I also just want to take a moment to come back to this. What is civil activism? I don't think citizens can be everywhere all the time. We've got such busy lives. And that's why organizations like NGOs, like OUTA, exist to be in Parliament, to start asking these questions. We become your active citizens when you get behind an organization like ours. So that active citizenry is around not only doing, because you can do a lot, but it's also supporting. And when you put all of that together, it just makes the power of citizenry, of active citizenry, of civil activism, turns us into not just a watchdog, but an attack dog. We can't just watch corruption happening. We have to fight it, and we have to fight it hard. But that's a long answer to your question. A lot of these chapters stood out. This is a book that flows and that really tells in a nice read what has actually gone wrong. And as Ilse said, it doesn't cover everything, but it really paints the picture well.
Yeah, Rudy, any standout chapter for you? I mean, it is a very, very well-researched piece of work, but there's going to be one part that says to you, we were once there.
Kaya, just after the July riots, I wrote, just from the, doing it by myself, not really thinking that it will go any further. I wrote a piece on the looting that took place in KZN and in Gauteng. And that was taken up in our newsletter. And I think the crux there is that when the riots and the looting took place in July in our country, we had ringside seats. We saw this, we experienced it. Civil society and the public, everybody came together to clean up after the time. They stood with each other during the time. And I compared that because billions of rands were lost there, livelihoods were lost there, lives were lost there. And I compared that with the invisible looting that took place in our country over the past decade or so. And tried to let the reader realize that as law enforcement agents stood by and watched what happened in KZN in July, the same law enforcement agents, ministers, cabinet, parliament committees stood by and watched what happened over the last decade in our country, where there was the same kind of looting, just much more was taking place. We lost billions and billions of rands. I mean, if you look at Paul Holden's report, he said that just the contracts that were the Guptas were involved in was 57 billion rand, state contracts, government contracts. They put in their pockets more than 16 billion rand. And that is just one example. We're not even talking about the Steinhoffs, the VBS, the collusion when in 2010 when the stadiums for the FIFA World Cup was built. If we look at all that, one can just put your hands together and be amazed at what we have lost, what was looted in this country over the past decade, 15 years, and think to yourself, if I do not stand up now, and if I do not something now, this will continue. And we see it is continuing. And we must stand up. But imagine we had all that funds in our hands and we could put it to use, to good use. Where would the country have been?
Imagine. Nancy, I'd like to bring you in here now. You've been able to hear the reflections of the authors of the book, and also perhaps it serves as a reminder to you of some of the episodes that the country has been through a truly extraordinary, I would say, 15-year period. Upon reflection, when you now look at clearly this reflection that the system as it is has not delivered those types of outcomes, what do you feel as a citizen in relation to what needs to be done in order to fix our system so that it does actually restore that compact of accountability?
The only thing I can say is we are leaderless. And it's just so unfortunate that, you just see in the poor communities where people still lack, basic services like water, but those people still elect the same party over and over again. And you wonder what's going on. I think the one thing that we need is accountability. And I really liked what I think Rudy mentioned, that we need to, to stand up as the public. And, voting is not enough. There's more that we need to do. You get invited to community meetings to solve the problems in your community. But then you go there, then 1 or 2 people turn up. The rest of the people are sitting happily at home. Unfortunately, this is our country. This is our future. If we don't stand up as citizens and do something to change the status quo, then the rot will continue to deepen. You just have to see how the political parties now are, like trading with whom was going to coalition with who. And I wonder it's nice now to see, how the opposition came together to vote against the ANC. But then I worry what's going to happen, in a couple of weeks' time, in a couple of months' time, because all of them I believe that they're looking after their own interests, is what is it in it for me? So it's not really about what is good for South Africa as a country and for us as citizens of this beloved country. So it's really in our hands to stand up and really do more to make sure that this democracy that so many people fought for and died for work for us. It's now, time is over now to be complacent and just go and vote, once in a while. We need to do more and stand up and be accountable as citizens.
Nancy, when we talk about needing to do more, I suppose the unfortunate reality of the times we live in is that eventually becomes a question of resources. And we've obviously seen that in relation to holding the state accountable, you are literally fighting against a machinery that is actually using your own taxes to fight you. And I think there have been incidences, Section 27, for example, equal education, OUTA, a whole lot of organizations that are actually taking on the state, and the state is using our own resources to fight what in some cases are essentially meaningless battles. How do we get that right in order to ensure that civil society organizations in particular are properly capacitated to pursue these challenges on our behalf?
I think we can start by supporting organizations like OUTA. I was just thinking as I'm sitting here, when you ask the panelists to just mention, a chapter which resonates with them, that we can start from today to say, now we have this book, the book is available. People can just start by buying the book and supporting the work of OUTA so that they can continue to do more. They can continue to do more on our behalf, on some of the citizens who are not really doing anything. But if you just pay that only 250 rands to buy this book, you'll go a long way in supporting OUTA as a civil society organization. And then you don't end there. You also look out for other civil society organizations who are really struggling to get funding. See where you can support. I mean, a minimum of 200 rands a month can go a long way to pay the salaries of the staff, to help them to do more research. That's how I see it.
Very important considerations then. We have a question in the chat box from Janet Cherry, who says, do you think that perhaps it is not that the MPs don't care, but that they're fearful of consequences? And Rudy, I suppose until the motion of no confidence ballots, for example, were in secret, we probably did see a manifestation of what Janet is referring to say even those that would say they had a conscience within the ANC in particular, we didn't see a manifestation of that that conscience until we bought them a way out by, I think it was the EFF and the UDM in particular, saying a secret ballot is the way to go. That doesn't sound like the type of courageous leaders that we should be having in the first place, Rudy.
Absolutely, Kaya, you are 100% correct, and I think Leah's correct as well. That people are fearing for their, first of all, their positions. They don't want to be kicked out. They don't want to lose their position of power in Parliament. If you go back and you look at somebody like Dr. Makosi Khoza that stood up in Parliament, and she just, was kicked out. So when things like that occur, obviously people are fearful of their futures in Parliament, in the party, and doing what they are there to do, although they just, towing the party line. The other thing that I also want to mention is that what Nancy said is very important about funding. But we must also remember that, what happened in South Africa in March 2017, when thousands of people rocked up at Church Square and said, listen, we are going to make a statement and we're going to march together. And that is also ways of approaching these issues. Is not only always by financial funding and contributions, but also to do the hard yards and go up and clean the river with the people in your street, or go and march and hold, give over that message to the powers that be. Go and stand in front of the Hawks' office and tell them, listen, we have laid charges 2-3 years ago. There's nothing coming to the fore. What is happening here? Ask the difficult questions and be persistent and don't back down.
Very key. Ilse, for citizens watching this with broadcast right now, the question of what is this one thing that you would like for them to sort of view this book as? What is the public utility, no pun intended, of this resource should be for all of us?
I lost you there for a moment, but I hope that I've got your question right. Or maybe just say again, Kaya.
Yeah. When people buy this book, what is this one thing that you want them to take from it as a learning lesson for us going forward, whether it's in how we inform our electoral choices or how we even engage with the state?
The one thing is that we have power and that we should start using it. And Twitter isn't power. Twitter is a form of power, but put your money where your beliefs are. Support organizations like OUTA, support good, independent, investigative journalism, support good moral people in your community, and start asking hard questions. Like Rudy also said, and Wayne said, things like the ETOLs, I will call it a revolution, gave a lot of people courage to say enough is enough. And we should all unite on that front and say, this is enough. This is now. We want a future for our children in this country, and we're going to take back the power. And you don't have to be radical and do radical things for that. Just use your power as a decent human being. Use your purse, and of course, go and join something like an OUTA Bridge Brigade every now and again. It's exhilarating to stand there with our guys and to see how the public responds to people standing up to power and speaking truth to power. And I think that's one of the things that we fell into a comfort zone in South Africa. Things are going well. We're the Rainbow Nation. The whole world is talking about our lovely constitution. So we are A-okay. We're not. We need to start realizing that this is the turning point and this responsibility lies with all of us.
We clearly have got a broken accountability compact that enabled plundering to happen, and Parliament enabled it by not actually doing its job. They were paralyzed, they were unfit for purpose on the job. What are the recommendations for the future?
Well, I think it's about active citizenry, and I just want to build on that. We never set out to write this book. The book became a product of our work. It was a good idea to start documenting some of this work. You know, if I look back over the last 6 years as we broadened our mandate to fight corruption and maladministration, we knew the journey was the right one. We didn't know which way it was going to go. We've done a couple of iterations of strategy and structure, but all in all, it's starting to lead us more to how do we empower citizens? How do we empower local organized communities to do what they've got to do? Because I think what we have found, Kaya, is that a lot of people want to do stuff, but they don't understand their rights and the powers that they have. And that's why we're launching the Citizens Action Movement shortly. It's a platform. That's why we've launched apps. What we're trying to do now is to say to citizens, you can become part of the change. You need to be part of the solution. Do not leave it all in the hands of politicians, because they will surely mess it up because they don't have you at the core of every decision. So how do we make citizens become core? We remind them through these various initiatives that are being launched. And as I think my colleagues have said, you know, get behind organizations. And it's not just OUTA, there are many out there, but I don't think people know that we are purely a crowd-funded organization. It's an average of 110 Rand per donor on a monthly basis. And that makes all the difference. You know, I think it was Nancy was quoting one of the philosophers, who was it? Edmund Burke. And we always quote him when we say, you know, the person who makes the biggest mistake is the one who feels or decides to do nothing because they could only give a little. And that's so sad, because all those littles add up. And that's why OUTA employs 42 specialist professional people at market-related salaries to do this work, to have the continuity, to go and hold people to account. That's what we're about. And every one of these individuals in our office are extremely motivated and highly energized. So get on board. Let us be the vehicle for the fight that you want to bring. We'll do it, but we just need, I mean, if we had double the amount of supporters, we'd have double the amount of staff and we'd take on double the amount of projects. But it's lovely. This is a great organization and we love this country, and we're going to fight on behalf of our citizens. So thanks to all our supporters, and thanks, Nancy, and to Cass for just enabling this book to be printed and so that it sheds the light on what these issues are.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, you're out of time. Thank you very much to my panelists, Ilse, Rudy, and Wayne, and Nancy. The book is out. It will be out soon. Permitted Plundering. You can get it through various platforms. You can check on the chat box where some of those platforms are. It is a very important archive of a history of a country that is learning how to live with this democracy, learning how to live with the politicians that it has somehow elevated into this democracy. And if the events of the past couple of days in particular, anything to go by, it certainly does indeed look like that activism, that awareness is delivering the outcomes that are at least enabling people to demand just a bit more from those who lead us. Thank you very much. This has been an OUTA webinar sponsored with CAS, and the book is Permitted Plundering. Please go and buy it. My name is Kasi Tole. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Kaya. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Kaz, for
Thanks,
sponsoring this.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.